Hey, and welcome to Matt and Jess TV. I am Matt Rose.
And I'm Jessica Bun Bun.
Welcome to our Severance Season 2, Episode 6 reaction and review for all of you Christopher Walken fans out there. This episode is a gift. This episode has some great stuff for him to do. And they also even cast that line out there to all of you Fringe fans, which is one of those ultimate shows where you had to be patient with it because it got a lot better after season 1. But John Noble is here playing the role of Fields, Burt's husband, and it was so awesome to see him.
Yeah, he was a really great cast, and seeing sort of the back and forth between Burt and Fields, it was really compelling stuff. That whole dinner sequence, really, really good stuff. We had some things that came out from Fields where he kind of let it slip that this has been going on for at least 20 years. Burt's trying to cover it up. And then you've got Irving over here being like, I thought it was only 12 years. And if you've seen our theory video, you already know that we think that Irving is probably a detective, and that's why he accepted to go over and speak to Burt, speak to Fields, learn as much as he could. Now he's got this information where he's kind of like, what is the truth here? What is really going on? Is Burt behind a lot more of this? Is he somebody who's behind the Lumon technology altogether?
It's a crazy thing to think about that, it's Burt, this guy at O&D who we've sort of seen on the show in this other capacity.
Break my heart, man.
The more that, we think about it, the more likely it actually seems that Burt may be kind of a secret or silent architect behind a lot of this. We're going to get into the timeline of things, how this is possible, whether or not Burt even fully remembers all of it. But before we do, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It is a great way to make sure you do not miss any of our Severance reviews, our theories. Subscribing is a great way because it helps to get us closer to 70,000, a milestone we've been trying to reach for a long time now.
We have been trying to reach this milestone for a while. We've been doing this a really long time. So thank you so much to everybody who is hitting that subscribe button to help us get to that. It really means a lot to us. And also, if you want to support us further and get more Severance content, join our Patreon. We have a link for you below. It's a great way to help support us. We are also covering The Pit, which is airing on Max over there, and also Prime Target, which is airing on Apple TV Plus over there, is the only place that you can get those videos. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you guys so much. We really, really appreciate that.
All right, let's dig into this dinner.
Okay, we're going to go on a little bit of a journey through time here. So everybody,
boop.
Thank you. All right, we are back now in the 1860s because...
Wow, that was quite a lot.
Yeah.
Beep, beep, pop, boop, boop.
There's a lot of beeping required. Okay, but this is supposedly when, Lumon was first formulated. We talked about this with the Cold Harbor theory back at the start of this season, that, this is a company that in some form has been around for a very, very long time. But that doesn't mean that that is when the mainstream public knew about them. That doesn't mean that that's when, they understood what this means. We already know, the severed floor part of this has not been around anywhere near that long. But this brings us back to that time frame that you mentioned a little bit earlier here, because this idea that has Lumon only existed for 12 years versus Burt, you're meeting with people 20 years ago. What happened in those extra 8 years of time?
Yeah.
It really, to me, feels a lot like, okay, Burt was involved in the early development of all of this stuff that happened. But we also know, what is Lumon really good at? Manipulating people's minds. So if we're to kind of follow that line of logic and also assume that if you are the Egan family, if you are Lumon, they're going to be like almost every other super powerful company out there. And not to get too painting with a broad brush here, but what do we know about the history of companies? They take people's ideas, they claim them as their own. I think that what's probably happened here is that Burt came up with a lot of the ideas, and whether or not he is the one who typed them all into a computer and put them in action, that's neither here nor there. But it feels like, to me, they took a lot of his stuff. They found a way to get some of that out of his brain. They promised him a job. He ends up being at O&D. And basically, they keep him around as sort of this figurehead until he's no longer of use to them because he's serving as this distraction to Irving. And in turn, maybe that's a distraction to Mark because we know the most important thing to them is Cold Harbor at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been around a very long time. I think
Yeah.
that slip from Fields was definitely a slip. I know
Yeah.
Burt was like, he's just too much wine, it's a nothing. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it, Irv. You want to meet up later? Yeah, I'll meet up later. I think they both, at this point, these two men are trying to get information from each other at this point. Burt feels like he is much more involved in this company than we ever thought. And him being down on the severed floor, maybe he knew that Irving was a detective or was down there trying to gather information. He put himself down there to figure out what's going on. It's clearly not the first time we've seen this happen with Helena as well, right? So has he only really been there 20 years? I mean, yeah, they met up with his colleagues 20 years ago, but maybe he's been there even longer. Maybe he's part of the board. There's a reason why we don't ever hear the voices of anyone who's part of the board. He's old enough to have been there. He's clearly worked there long enough to be part of the board.
Yeah, like all of that feels at this point to me more than possible. It's just the way that the meeting was spoke about made it feel like Burt was a very integral part of it, that he wasn't just like some like tiny piece in the overall puzzle. The idea that he's working at OMD, optics and design, just the word design in itself is a pretty big clue that maybe he designed some pretty big things with Lumon as a company.
Yeah, or just the medical part of it. We know that, Helena has said, I was taking non-Lumon drugs. So obviously there's a real medical side of this. We saw Miss Swan come up and, put on like a blood pressure gauge thing. Lumon is on it. And I know everything has Lumon on it, but the amount of medical instruments that have been used on this show that say Lumon, it's a lot. Even with Cobell having the tube that goes down your throat, there's so much stuff that's going on with medical stuff. The guy pushing the cart with all the instruments on it. I think the technology is very medically based.
Yeah, that goes all the way
on top of course, putting in the severance chips.
It goes all the way back to what we were saying with the 1860s because, Severance, they put up this silly website about Lumon and, they sort of suggested in that back when Keir Egan first founded it was to kind of have these medical salves. So it feels a lot like it's Old West. Hey, everybody, come check out this magic elixir that will heal everything. But that is the central idea of Lumon, that they believe that they can heal the world and that this severance program, they may think it's actually for the betterment of everybody, or at the very least, they want people to think it's for the betterment of everybody, when really what they want here is control. But the other part of this that really does make me feel like, okay, Burt was definitely up to something, whether he remembers it or not is kind of irrelevant. But the whole story about, I went into Lumon in particular to find an element of salvation that I felt like I was not getting in my real world. And there might be some truth to that, but at the same time, it also felt very practiced. Like if they know that Irving is coming, somebody who was an innie at Lumon, that they should probably get their story straight, and that's why it was such a big deal when Fields messed it up.
Yeah, it did feel kind of practiced. It might be something that Fields really does believe in, this idea that, Burt was such a scoundrel and he's not going to heaven, but our pastor said that innies can have a soul. So this is our loophole workaround to make sure that he's in heaven with me, sort of thing. That I think that Fields does believe the story that he's telling, but I think Burt is just manipulating everybody. And it really hurts my heart because that whole Irving Burt innie love story is one of my all-time favorite love stories. And now we're here in the outie world where Irving is fired. Will he ever go back? Probably not. And we've got this idea now that Burt is lying. I think Irv is also lying. They're both hiding what their true intentions are, and they are on opposite sides of this. And I just think that Burt is way deeper in than anything Irv could have ever thought.
Everything that we saw from Irv in this episode, I think it does cement further this idea that, okay, Herb really is a detective. He's trying to dig into everything.
Yeah,
Like,
we saw Drummond going into his
yeah,
apartment, going through his chest, seeing all these different things.
yeah,
I mean, that wasn't great either. I mean, but it did give us a little
yeah,
more insight into what's going on. Watching Drummond pull up the list of all the different people who were like part of the program
yeah,
or whatever, there was somebody that was there who got hurt in a car crash. His name
yeah,
was Doug Coleman. His severed date was November 19th, no year. But the
yeah,
car crash was 2007. So,
yeah,
I mean, that was quite a while ago if we're to think that they are in 2025 or 24
yeah,
at this point. But there was another note sort of beside it about, he had fractured his hand. There was a lawsuit with the city. And then sort of a note beside it, wondering if the settlement led to severance, sort of this idea that we've been playing with here at the
yeah.
channel for a really long time now, that people who are getting hurt, like Gemma,
Hmm.
maybe like this Doug Coleman, that sort of thing, people that are getting hurt or incapacitated, not able to make decisions for themselves, are
Yeah.
getting permanently severed so that they can't come after the city or they can't come after Lumon in any kind of way. And they're like, we'll take them off your hands. We'll be able to sort of do what we want with them and make them permanently severed employees where they just work for us without permission forever. Just the darkness.
It is really, really dark, but I think it's also really feasible the more that we kind of get into it on this show, because this is an ideal situation for Lumen. And I hate to put it in those terms, but it's this idea that you can have people who are never going to be able to disclose, an actual secret. And it's this other moral idea. It's like, okay, if we don't take these people in, what's going to happen to them? They're just going to be dead, or they're going to be comatose, or
Yep.
they're not going to ever be able to do anything. So we're breathing this new quote unquote life into them. I have to say this when it comes to Drummond and also Rickon.
Mhm.
Why do we have two of these guys? Like, they look too close for
They
me.
really do.
For a moment, I thought that it was Rickon who was actually breaking it. I know it's not, but I was confused just because we have two guys with long brown hair and
Yes.
beards.
Yes. I mean, Drummond is huge. So that
Yeah.
was the only reason I was really able to pull them apart. But
Yeah.
they do look very similar.
Let's continue to be in the Audi world here and get
Yes.
over to what's happening with Helena and Mark, because I think this is sort of a
Yes.
fascinating reflection on a lot of big ideas on this show that I think even Helena is struggling with on some level, even if she, used the awful term to describe them, animals in this past episode. But I
Yes.
think she's struggling with this question of, do innies have a soul? And that's something you mentioned, and it makes me think of Legion, my favorite character from Mass Effect, being like, did this unit have a soul? I love Legion so much, but
I
no,
know you do.
I really think that this is just a really interesting discussion that this show is presenting, because Helena's eyes are opened. And I know that we can sit here and be like, okay, Helena did do some awful things in Woe's Hollow. Like, that's
Terrible.
yeah, like that's abundantly clear. But I think she's also in her mind kind of wrestling with, how am I having some sort of emotional attachment for this person who I'm not supposed to think of as anything, because I don't think it's some coincidence that she was there at this diner at the same time as Mark.
No, we talked about this before as well in other videos. The idea that Helena made the decision to go in herself
Yes.
the minute that she saw her innie kissing Mark and having this intimate relationship. I think she was actually really honest when Helena went in there and told them that her Audi lives a very lonely life. I think she does. I think she's by herself in her place. She doesn't have anybody. She doesn't have any connection to anybody. All she does is work. And when she sees her innie actually making a romantic connection, a deeper connection, a more intimate connection, she gets very jealous of it and comes in and does the horrible thing she does to Helly's body, to Mark's body.
Yeah.
Like, it was very difficult to watch. But now she's back out in the Audi world.
Yeah.
But she's still having these feelings of, oh, well, now I'm back out here being told what to do, living this lonely life. And I still feel this connection to Mark. So yeah, it's not a coincidence that she was there.
Yeah.
Do I think she's there to get a little bit of information? Sure. But she was also there definitely kind of having a flirt on with him to see if maybe there's something there in the Audi world as well.
I think
it was really gross to watch. I'm not going to pretend that it wasn't.
No, it was really, really gross to watch. And I think at some point we're going to have some sort of full on reckoning with what happened in Woe's Hollow. But that's all going to be dependent on how much Outie Mark can eventually remember about all of this. But in this particular situation, in this scene, I think Helena, see, I'm even getting it confused now, but I think Helena
we all do,
is really in this position where she's got a natural curiosity about how much do outies and innies really have in common. And if I was feeling this way towards Innie Mark, how am I feeling towards Outie Mark? And I think this might actually also help her to better understand the relationship she has with her own Innie, where her own Innie is so rebellious and hates being there so much. And I think it could cause her to sit back and be like, okay, well, why am I going along with this company if I do not like it, if I want to laugh at the story of Dieter? And this is why we did that video earlier about whether or not Helena could ultimately be the one to destroy and topple this company for good, just because I think she's going to eventually come to some emotional revelations about who she is, the purpose that she has, how she's viewed by these other people. And there definitely was a rapport between her and Outie Mark. I mean, both the Outie versions of these characters are a lot more jaded. I don't think either one of them really knows how to express themselves, but just that discussion, I think they both probably felt like they got more out of it than they were expecting going in.
Mark definitely got something out of it because he ran out of there, got in that car and was like, let's do it. Flood that chip. I want to be reintegrated as fast as possible. I don't care what happens to me. And Devin shows up. He's laying on the floor. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I understand where Mark is coming from. And I think a lot of us, any of us that have ever been in love, that, you know, would do anything to have another moment with somebody, would go to these lengths. And so it's not too surprising that that was the motivation to be like, let's go all the way.
Here's the biggest question I have with all, because I think one of the things that really sparked Outie Mark more than ever is we saw Helena call Gemma the wrong name in this meeting.
Brutal. And she just doesn't get, she's so horrible.
I'm back and forth as to why she did that, because to me, she obviously knew her real name. Like, I don't buy for a second that she doesn't know what Gemma's real name is.
Does she? Or is she just so careless and just doesn't care about anybody else about herself that she just, you know, thought she knew it, but she didn't?
It's possible. I just felt like she just intentionally called her the wrong name, either because she wanted to be mean or passive aggressive,
get a reaction out of them,
or she wanted to at least look like that her outie would be ignorant or passive aggressive, and she's trying to put on that sort of act. And it's one of these, but I just think that's really the thing that sparks him more than ever, because like, okay, these people clearly don't care about me at all. I don't know anything about my wife's name, so why do I continue to be loyal to these people?
They don't even care about Gemma to remember her name, that they have taken his wife and they don't even remember her name. Like, it was easily enough for Mark to be like, I'm done with this. Get me in there. Let me get her out. There's nothing else.
I will have to say this though, because we saw the earlier part of the operation here with Mark's head. I think the moment that I started to see something like that, I'm just being like, nope, I'm leaving. That looks like a really bad time. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, no, it does look like a bad time. I'm not here to have somebody cutting into my head like, I love and, you know, all that. But like, I don't know. You guys tell us too. Would you be willing to have somebody cut open your head in your basement to be able to see someone that you love?
I think it's all relative.
I think I probably would.
I would in the right situation, because I love too, but I think the risk here is, one, as you're pointing out, they're in a basement. Two, this is Regavi.
It's all a risk.
Regavi's like, oh, I think it's work. I think I figured it out this time, which is never really the greatest vote of confidence in the world. I would be like, oh, great, question mark.
I think the thing is that Mark just doesn't really care if he is living or dying at this point, that without Gemma, nothing really matters, which is why he entered the Severance program in the first place. It's like, I don't care about anything anymore. So go ahead.
Yeah, I do think that's really a reflection of what we're seeing here. I think the tricky part of this episode is that I just think that there are a lot more interesting things happening in the outside world than the
Mm.
inside world. Like even going back to everything that was going on with Fields and then, also Burt's, like
Yeah.
the name they call each other, the pet name that they call each other. That's even the title for this episode. Like, why are you using a name for each other that's associated with aggression? Is this sort of a hint to the idea that Burt was aggressively developing something? It just feels like the fact that they named this episode that's meaningful to me. I don't know fully why. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough name, especially since it started somewhere sweet where they were calling each other hun.
Yeah.
To go to that, somewhere along the line, something just didn't work out. And I was just kind of like, yeah, it could be something to do with Burt at Lumon. It could have something to do with what Fields was saying, where he was like, oh, yeah, Burt was a real scoundrel when he was younger. Maybe he was a real scoundrel when they were together. And he really hurt Fields many, many times. I mean, Fields even brought up, he was just like, do you think that your two innies were together? Like, in a way that's really intimate. And I'm not saying that out of jealousy and hurt. And I'm just like, no, but you are. Like, I know you're not just saying it to be like, innies deserve love too, but not when it's your husband.
Dan Erickson just really liked the history of various conflicts across time because there's just so many references to all of that. But okay, we'll stay on the topic of complicated relationships. We'll dive into the innie world. Here we go, Dylan and Gretchen. I think we both saw this coming, but it was still surprising to actually see it now.
It was surprising to see that she's now lying to outie Dylan about going to see innie Dylan, sharing hugs, sharing kisses, sharing intimacy. It's not too surprising that they got together, but it was a bit surprising that she's like, yeah, no, I'm not going in there anymore.
I wish, given how much outie Gretchen and Dylan seem to watch TV, Gretchen should know the classic television rule: secrets always come out.
Always.
You are not going to keep this a secret forever.
No.
Who knows how this could happen? I mean, maybe at some point Milchick accidentally interacts with outie Dylan and is just like, oh, it's been nice seeing Gretchen show up here. And then all of a sudden, this is just going to blow apart. Now, I understand the idea of I don't agree with what Gretchen is doing, but I understand what her thought process probably is, which is this, oh, I'm seeing a version of my husband who is more confident, who I really like and I'm interested in, and that's just going to make my outie husband feel so much worse. Though there's
sure, but then don't do it.
Yeah, like don't do it. And how about instead try to see what is making your innie husband so confident and so self-assured, and then try to encourage your outie husband to feel that way. Or there's got to be a better way to handle this, because clearly this is a version of Dylan she loves, and that kind of tells me that this version of Dylan probably existed once upon a time, and that there is a good way to get him back.
Sometimes. I mean, sometimes we lose those versions of ourselves and we're not able to get them back. It does happen. And maybe at this point, Gretchen has been with him so long that she's just like, I remember this side of Dylan, but this side isn't coming back. So this is my only way to reconnect with my Dylan that I remember.
I just have to say this.
It's so sad.
It's really, really sad. And with Lumon and a company in particular here, like I know Milchick was all about trying to find ways to reward the innies and give them rewards and all this. I'm just sort of tinfoil hat thinking right now, was this really a good idea? Because now we're in this spot where Gretchen's having this affair with innie Dylan. If outie Dylan finds out about it, he's just going to be like, well, I don't want to work here anymore because this is happening. I'm going to try to take Dylan out, and that's not going to be good for Milchick. It kind of feels like this is a bad move.
Let's talk about Milchick for a second here, because this was a really interesting spot he's in. We've spoken about Milchick here and there, about the idea that maybe he is kind of cracking under the pressure. He might be somebody that decides to go a little bit rogue after that whole, like, we're sitting down with you and giving you a performance report, and it's 6 hours long and it's not great. We're going to talk about your use of paper clips, not good. Your use of, big words, not good. And it was really tough to watch him sit there and basically give himself penance by taking the largest jar of paper clips, making himself use them over and over again, almost like writing on the chalkboard 100 times. I will use paper clips properly. It was so sad, but to really see him like turn on that light, look in the mirror, and change the way he speaks, which is a part of himself, into just basically telling himself to grow, broke me apart.
He's clearly so defeated. And I think the question becomes like, why? Why is he so willing to be at a place that does not value him for who he is? And I think some of it is he's probably had some sort of Lumon experiment done on him, like a lot of these people have, that I think that's impacting him. But I also just brought up the idea that he probably needs this job because a lot of people in life need jobs. And we don't know how much money he's being paid. He might be being paid a lot more at this job than the average job somewhere else. He might just be putting up with a lot, or it's possible Lumon has something on him. Like there might be a real sense of jeopardy he's feeling.
Well, let's also talk about Wintertide, because this was brought up by Milchick as well, where he tells Miss Huang that she cannot graduate from this fellowship until he deems her worthy for Wintertide as Wintertide material. And I was just like, what is Wintertide? Is this another Cold Harbor? Something else that's going on?
Okay, here's my crazy theory about where it is right now with all of this. That I feel like Miss Huang, because, she is young and new.
Yeah, she is.
She's probably a product of the latest round of experiments or whatever they've done, where maybe we've talked about this before, how we feel like a lot of these people at Lumon have been injected or implemented with some Kier juice, the DNA. They have elements of Kier that are put inside of them so that they can act more and more like Kier. And I think they're trying to figure out how they can have as much of an any that's still human as possible to constantly avoid some sort of attention from the outside world. So I think Miss Huang may be the newest generation of that, but because she's still new, like you got to take it through test runs. You got to make sure that this person's capable of still being a human, but also a reflection of Kier. And I kind of think that maybe Wintertide, I wondered, like, does this mean that she has to be capable enough to someday run an Ortbo on her own? Does it just mean that she has to be capable enough of, really leading a full floor on her own? And that's just, they have to make sure that she's ready.
Okay, tinfoil hat. Okay. I think that Wintertide is going to be the next Cold Harbor, and that she will be the person that is going to be running whoever it is that person is then going to be putting in their data to build up the percentage to bring somebody else either back or reprogram them or something else. That after Cold Harbor is done and Mark has finished his stuff, the next program that's moving in, it is Wintertide. And she will be the person that will be running that part of the program of whoever's putting in the data and whoever's coming back.
I think the biggest piece of evidence that there might be something to that in particular is that Miss Huang is so young, because it's possible that this is an operation that could take decades. Because if you are doing some sort of research, it takes a long time. And beyond all that, you would want somebody there to establish continuity over the course of decades. So maybe Miss Huang can be that person. And that's the big reason why she is exactly who she is, which has been a very bizarre question all season long.
All right, let's talk about Mark and Helly taking their power back. They finally have this conversation where, we saw Milchick kind of threaten Mark to bring up, oh, well, you two were intimate in the tent. Like, did you tell Helly? No. Okay, then I have something over you. And Mark deciding to take his power back and just be like, you know what? I'm going to tell her this is what happened. I thought that I was with you. I wasn't. This happened to me and it happened to you. So I think that you have a right to know that this happened and it happened to both of us, and that she took advantage of both of our bodies, and we were both used in that way and vitilated in that way. And Helly goes to take a moment with that, really let it sink in. And she comes back with the decision that she's like, I'm not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
Like, that's not okay. I'm going to take back the power. You should take back the power. Do you want to be together and have that experience? You clearly thought that you were being with me. I didn't get a chance to use my own body to be with you, something that I would have chosen to do, and I am choosing to do now. I love that they made that little tent together. This was a million times more satisfying than watching Helena go in there, where we all felt that it was her, and that it was so awkward. And, you know, you want to see them get together, but not like that. This was it. This was the moment. This is the way that it should have always been.
It was really
them building that tent.
I know.
Oh,
it was very, you know, I know what they're doing, and there's just a real wholesome element to it in that moment, despite this being a really dark show. And I know that a lot of times with the world of Severance, as you can probably figure out based on where we are in this season, things are really complicated, and there's a lot to sort of theorize about and speculate on. But this is one of the few times that I think something is exactly as it's presented to be, which is just that these two people wanted to feel a sense of sovereignty to themselves and to each other. And so they found a way to have this moment that was beautiful and tender, and it really establishes them on this road towards whatever their future is going to be. Like, if there's any question I have in the aftermath of it, it's that, Miss Wong, if you are actually trying to graduate from your fellowship here or whatever, you're kind of a terrible boss, because these people have gone off to do this in the tent. Where are you? Like, what's going on here? You're just like, where are my employees at?
People hooking up at work all the time. Let's be honest.
Wintertide, you're going to be waiting a long time for, Miss Wong. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so anyone out there a fan of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
Me, one of my favorite movies.
Okay, me too as well. And sort of the premise of this is that you've got someone who was very in love, this relationship fell apart, and he's willing to sort of have his mind played with to take out all the memories of just them together, because he is too heartbroken to be able to deal with it. Then nearer to the end of it, spoiler for a film that's like 20 years old, he's trying to stop that from happening. He's like rushing to try to keep those memories, because he realizes that the heartbreak is worth it to be able to keep the memories of this love. It is one of the best movies that's ever out there. Tinfoil Hat, I'm starting to feel like we might see something like that from Mark, because now that him and Helly have been together, and, you know, they really are solidifying their relationship and their commitment and their love and their strength with each other, I could see any Mark starting to try to fight back at this integration with outie Mark to save this relationship and these memories that he is building with Helly. Because once that's integrated, he might be afraid that those memories might just disappear.
It's very much plausible, just because of the idea that this is a character who doesn't really know how to process grief, who decided to be in this program because they just wanted to not deal with the grief.
Right.
So the idea then that, I need to try to find another way to deal with it, because especially outie Mark does not know how to process emotions, that I think it's fair to say that any Mark ultimately is going to have a similar kind of struggle. That I can easily see something like this happen. I think the biggest thing when it comes to any Mark and outie Mark right now, and not to say that anything has been too easy, but it's also just been that we have gone where we've gone with this reintegration process really quickly versus where I thought we were going to be at the start of the season. That I think there's going to be some sort of hiccup or roadblock along the way, and this could be a major part of it, especially if he tries something and it does not exactly go according to plan, because, you know, not everything with this technology goes according to plan.
Exactly.
But there is where we are on Severance Season 3, Episode 6. I mean, just still, what a phenomenal season of television. I think this is my favorite show of the year right now. I know it's still early. There's a lot of time.
Easily going to be my favorite of the year. Like, easily. I know there's a lot of time and there's a lot of stuff coming up. I mean, Handmaid's Tale, the final season's coming up. What a great show. But, like, if they land the plane and these last few episodes are just as good, like, this has been solid all the way through. I have no complaints.
Yeah, it really shows that they actually did take their time with this, and they weren't just stalling, making us wait for so many years.
They really care about it.
Yeah, well, hit that subscribe button so you guys don't miss any of our other coverage, and help us get to 70,000. Support us further by joining our Patreon. We have a link in the description below. We are covering there exclusively Prime Target as well as The Pit. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you here next time.